than anybody in that division. Kyle Lowry, Terrence Ross, DeRozan, Amir Johnson, Valentinos. That is a very complete lineup, especially going forward. As the years progress, this is just going to be even better. Guys like Grievous Vasquez, Louis Williams, of course. You've got James Johnson, Landry Fields, Chuck Hayes. It's Chuck Hayes. Patrick Peterson, Tyler Hansbrough. Lots of talent and depth, especially as the years progress. And even in this year, they don't need these players necessarily to perform at unstoppable levels. They just need them to play well, to play their roles. And in a weak Atlantic, I personally would be shocked if they didn't come out of this division on top. I think they are getting a little bit overhyped in terms of whether or not they can really be a contending team in the Eastern Conference, but I definitely think this is their division to lose, and at the end of the day, I see Toronto coming out on top. Moving on now, the Central. That is the division that will most likely decide who gets the first seed, who gets the second seed. Chicago and Cleveland, and everybody has that as a two-horse race. CB, do you think it truly is a two-horse race? Do you think Indiana, Milwaukee, Detroit, do you think any of them could make even the slightest nudge at the top two?
No, and it's unfortunate that Indiana isn't what they were last year, because otherwise we'd see a really incredible race in the Central between those three teams. Milwaukee is starting to get a little bit better, and Detroit is completely starting to fall apart, but neither of those three teams are going to be able to compete with the power horses of Chicago and Cleveland this year. I think Chicago cares a little bit more about the regular season, just because of their coach, Tom Thibodeau. We saw him picking up a technical foul of 34 against the Knicks on opening night. If that doesn't show how much he cares, I don't know what does. I think this team is just going to try a lot harder to win games than Cleveland will. And I think the fact in general that Chicago is such a deep team, they're going to be able to keep guys rested. And on a day-in and day-out effort, this is going to help them be a more consistent team than in years past, where you'd have those games where the Bulls would go out and beat 2-3 really, really good teams in a row and then lose like Utah by 20 points or something like that. I think you're going to see a much more consistent effort out of Chicago this year because of how fresh their players are going to be. And they haven't even really had to play anyone over 30 minutes so far this year. So I think that's going to help them a lot this year, especially in the regular season. I think Cleveland still needs some time to gel, as evidenced by a loss to a mediocre Knicks team, in my opinion. So I think Chicago is still the better team in the Central at this point.
Yeah, I think Chicago is probably the better team. I'm going to stick with my pick of going with Cleveland in the Central. See, it's not even necessarily that I think Cleveland will win more games, actually, to be honest. It's just that because I feel like Chicago's a better team, and I'm trying to give Cleveland some kind of credit here. I think they will end up getting it because I think LeBron there's something about him that he helps his team just magnificently win tons and tons of games in the regular season, even if he doesn't try as hard. They just seem to win. So I'll give Cleveland the win there, but when it comes to the other three teams, honestly, I see Indiana as the fourth team right now. I like Detroit more than I like them. I think Milwaukee will actually give them some issues. It's sad to see how things change. You know, the loss of Lance Stevens, and then Paul George goes down to injury. The fact that they're relying on Roy Hibbert as one of their main producers is pretty sad. There was actually a tweet that went out about how the fact that the starting five for the Pacers looked like a Y-League pickup team. And it's pretty sad to see how this team went from one of the elites to an afterthought. And for Indiana, it's a tough road back, but once they get Paul George back, once they draft a couple of key pieces, I expect them to get back to contention. But for right now, it's just not going to be their year. On to the final division, and what I think is actually the most complete division in the Eastern Conference. The Southeast, you got Washington, Atlanta, Miami, Charlotte, and then, of course, Orlando. CB, who do you think comes out on top?
Well, before I say that, how can any Y-League team have a 7-foot center? That's a little in doubt, in my opinion. But I'm going to take Washington. I think this team's going to bring 4 playoff teams into the East this year in Miami, Washington, Atlanta, and Charlotte. And I think Washington's a team that is going to take a huge step forward this year, especially when Bradley Beal comes back. That team is going to be complete. They have, as we know, a great backcourt in Bradley Beal and John Wall. They have a great front court in Nene especially, and then they have Marcin Gortat as well. And then I think the small forward problem's probably small forward position is probably their biggest problem. But even still, you're throwing Paul Pierce out there and Otto Porter Jr., who had a great preseason as well. And they also have a little bit of depth off the bench with Chris Humphreys and DeJuan Blair at the big man position. And Martell Webster, who played a big role towards the end of the season for this DC team. That's the only thing that's going to hurt them a little bit is their depth. But I think their starting lineup is one of the best in the East.
Yeah, look, they brought in Paul Pierce for a reason. The Washington Wizards, of course, I'm speaking of. You see in the preseason, Paul Pierce goes at it with Joe Noah. And it's not just to go at it with him. It's to prove the point that Washington is there to fight. They're not going to go down easy. He brings the veteran presence, the grit to this team that I think will push them farther than they did last year. I think he's not as good as Ariza is right now, but he brings more grit. He brings a little bit more experience than Ariza. And you look at the rest of this team. Once they get Beal back, you have so much depth in that backcourt. Martell Webster, you've got Glenn Rice Jr., Garrett Temple, Andre Miller, not to mention Otto Porter Jr. As you said, you got Humphreys, Blair, Gooden, and of course Seraphin. There aren't many really bad pieces to this team. I think the low point would be Rasul Butler, but I will always love Rasul with a special place in my heart for his time with the Bulls. And I think that this team definitely is going to win this division. I think the Hawks are a good team, and I think the Hawks are definitely going to give them issues with their size. When you put a guy like Al Horford on the court, it's just hard to keep up with that. Paul Millsap, Perantic, Damari Carroll as well. They're a good team, and I agree with you. 4 teams out of this division: Charlotte, Miami, Atlanta, and Washington. Charlotte, of course, adding Lance Stevenson. And, of course, Michael Jordan had that sit-down interview talking about how this would be his most gratifying ring. I don't think it's going to be their year this year, but they are definitely an up-and-coming team. So, over to the Western Conference. It is a much stronger conference, and it's a lot harder to pick. But we'll do it anyways. The Northwest: Portland, Oklahoma City, Denver, Minnesota, and Utah. CB, who you got?
I think you're going to see a more complete year from Portland. They got off to such a great start last year and kind of tailed off. I think with Oklahoma City, without Durant and Westbrook, obviously, as we talked about earlier in the show, I think that's going to be something that's going to allow Portland to almost run away with this division. I don't think Denver's going to make the playoffs this year, even though they're not a bad team. And then Utah and Minnesota are certainly in rebuilding stages. Portland has a very complete team as well. You talk about at the point guard position, Damian Lillard has really been a revelation, and he's become one of the top 5 point guards in the league. And then LaMarcus Aldridge is a top 5 power forward in the league. Probably one of the worst trades in recent Bulls history, trading him away. But they also have Wesley Matthews at the 2 position and Nicholas Batum at the small forward position. Those 4 up front are incredible, and I don't think there's a better 4 in the NBA. Their one weak spot is Robin Lopez, who's definitely gotten better. But off the bench, they have Chris Kaman to help fortify that position. Now, their bench isn't as deep as some of the other teams. They have Steve Blake off the bench at point guard, which is certainly an improvement to what they had last year. And then C.J. McCollum at the shooting guard position. But I think other than that, their bench is pretty thin, but still compared to the rest of the division, they're by far the best team, especially with Oklahoma City dealing with all these injuries.
Yeah, I agree with you. I actually really like Portland this year. In terms of that starting lineup, it's a pretty dominant starting lineup. I think a lot of people look at Wes Matthews and don't really see the value behind him, but I really do like Wes Matthews, and don't get me started on the LaMarcus Aldridge trade. I mean, Tyrese Thomas. I like Tyrese Thomas. I like the guy, but he's no LaMarcus Aldridge. Thomas Robinson starting to come into his own. Darrell Wright, Chris Kaman off the bench. C.J. McCollum will actually be healthy. They've got a lot of depth at that shooting guard position. After Wes Matthews, go with Will Barton, McCollum, and Krabby. I think those are all guys who can adequately come in and provide some depth. One of the deeper teams, and I think they are going to take advantage of Oklahoma City's injuries and find themselves winning this division. I think Oklahoma City also makes it. I don't see Denver, Minnesota, or Utah. No Ty Lawson in the playoffs this year. We go to the Pacific now, where we have 2 of the most petty teams in the Western Conference, the LA Lakers and the Sacramento Kings. But the Kings not looking too bad, getting a win today against the Clippers behind Boogie, a.k.a. DeMarcus Cousins. We also have Phoenix, Golden State,
Boogie!
We all love Boogie. And the LA Clippers.
Bill Simmons likes him more than anyone, though.
That is true.
I think Bill Simmons probably likes him more than his own kids or something like that. I think Bill Simmons thinks Boogie's his own son. It's
a very nice relationship they have going. I think that's what drives Boogie to do better. Make his dad proud. A.k.a. Bill Simmons. Then, of course, as we said, the Clippers. It's probably between Clippers and Golden State, but Phoenix, they played well last year. CB, Clippers, Golden State, Phoenix, those are probably the three. Who wins it?
I think this is actually going to be a runaway. I had to find room for both Phoenix and Golden State in my playoff picture. I don't even know if I was able to fit Golden State in there. One of the two I had to leave out. I think Clippers can contend for a top spot this year. I think with Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, Chris Paul, that team's going to be stacked at some of the premier positions. Then they have some shooting with J.J. Redick and Matt Barnes. I think this team's going to be a pretty complete team. As we see, they have the bigs with Jordan and Griffin. They have the point guard and probably the best in the NBA in Chris Paul. And off the bench, they have the reigning sixth man of the year, and it's probably won it more times than he can count, Jamal Crawford. Now, their bench isn't as strong as it's been. They do have Spencer Hawes this year, but other than that, they're not going to keep you too much off the bench, other than Jamal Crawford. But I think this team's starting lineup is premier as well, and I think that other than the backcourt in Golden State and David Lee, they're going to struggle some this year. I think they'll probably barely make the playoffs, and I think Phoenix might barely make the playoffs as well, but I think the Clippers can contend for the number one seed.
Yeah, I've got the Clippers as well in this division. I think the Warriors are a good team. I think they've got Curry. I think they've got Clay, and they've been able to drive some good teams to the edge in recent playoff memory. But the Clippers just have that extra something. I mean, you look at the Warriors, they're in a transition year now from coach to coach. Bringing in Steve Kerr. I love Kerr and all, helped us win a couple championships. But at the end of the day, it's all about the Clippers. It's all about Lob City. Blake Griffin, he has range now. That's scary. That scares me. Blake Griffin was already such a talented player, and now he can shoot the three even sometimes. Chris Paul, you don't need to explain CP3. The guy can find any open player on the court. DeAndre Jordan, unstoppable down low, a beast defensive player. I've got the Clippers coming away with this one. Golden State in second for me. I actually see Phoenix missing the playoffs, unfortunately. But good effort nonetheless. Southwest now, I think this is one of the... this is a really deep division. I think you can
There's 5 teams in this division that should be playoff teams. Now, 5 teams will not come out of this division.
Yeah.
I even really like New Orleans this year with Anthony Davis, Omer Ashe, Drew Holiday, Tyreek Evans, and Ryan Anderson. That's a complete team. And they might not even make the playoffs. Memphis, who's been a great team recently, might not make the playoffs. And then you have San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston. This is one of the best divisions in a long time.
I have to agree. I go through the list of divisions. Sure, the Southeast is going to have a lot of representatives, but in terms of just the quality of the teams, the Southwest is going to be a dogfight. It's like what we became accustomed to seeing in the Big East in basketball, where they would just destroy each other, fighting for the top spot. San Antonio, we all know how good they are. The defending champions. Houston brings Dwight Howard and Harden. Dallas brings Dirk. They bring Monte. New Orleans has so much talent, so much youth, and of course the unibrow. And then Memphis, look, they had an off year last year, but they're still a very good team, and they are going to put up a fight as well. But at the end of the day, only one team can be crowned the champions of the Southwest, and at the end of the day, that probably won't matter. It's going to be who wins the championship, but it could be a consolation prize if none of these teams end up winning the title. CB, who do you think ends up with the Southwest title?
I think it's going to be Houston.